The gavel came down with a crack that was not just a sound, but a physical manifestation of finality. In my courtroom, that sound carved order from chaos drew a line in the sand that society dared not cross. It was a sound I had wielded for over a decade, a sound that had shaped lives, broken corporations, and upheld the fragile architecture of justice. I was Judge Eleanor Vance, and the weight of that responsibility was a mantle I wore every day. But as I stepped out of the sleek, black sedan that evening, the humid suburban air felt a million miles away from the hallowed, air-conditioned halls of the federal courthouse. Here I deliberately shed that identity. I traded the profound weight of my black robe for the simple, tangible burden of a grocery bag filled with fresh basil and tomatoes for a pasta I was too tired to cook. The dense, life-altering case files in my leather briefcase were swapped for the mundane concerns of whether I remembered to run the dishwasher. This house, my small, quiet Cape Cod with its slightly overgrown lavender bush by the walkway, was my sanctuary. It was the place where I wasn't Your Honor. I was just Ellie, a 58-year-old woman with a fondness for vintage jazz records, a soft spot for my golden retriever Bailey, and a deep, aching need for quiet. That quiet was shattered before my key even found the lock. The distinctive, aggressive click-clack of heels on pavement was a sound that had become the soundtrack to a slow-burning nightmare. It was the sound of Brenda. "Eleanor! A moment of your time, please." I closed my eyes for a brief second, drawing on the deep well of patience I usually reserved for pro se litigants with a tenuous grasp on reality. I turned, forcing a neutral expression onto my face. Brenda, the self-appointed queen and president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, stood there like a pastel-clad sentinel of disapproval. She was a woman who seemed sculpted from equal parts passive aggression and high-gloss hairspray, her smile as sharp and sterile as a scalpel. "Brenda," I said, my voice flat. "It's been a long day. Can this wait? It never seems to be a good time for you, does it?" She chirped, her eyes performing a quick, ruthless inventory of my person. My sensible, low-heeled pumps, my slightly wrinkled silk blouse, the single grocery bag that hinted at a solitary dinner. "I'm here about the hedges. The covenant is very clear, 42 inches. Yours are pushing 46. It creates an eyesore, a lack of uniformity that drags down everyone's property values." I looked past her at the hedges in question. They were vibrant, lush, and healthy, a testament to the careful attention of my landscaper. "They're plants, Brenda. They grow. I'll have Carlos trim them next week. And the paint," she continued, stepping closer, as if to physically impede my progress to my own front door. "The trim on your shutters? It's fading. It's looking decidedly beige. Our charter specifies colonial white. There is a distinct and important difference." I finally jammed my key into the lock, the metal scraping a protest. "Brenda, I have just spent 12 hours listening to arguments about corporate malfeasance that affected thousands of people. My feet hurt. My back aches. I can assure you, the shade of my shutter trim is not a pressing matter of justice." Her smile tightened into a thin, bloodless line. "Community standards don't keep bankers' hours, Eleanor. We all have a responsibility to uphold the value and character of Willow Creek. Some of us," she said, her gaze sweeping over my house with pointed disdain, "just take that responsibility more seriously than others." There it was, the subtle, venomous jab. The implication that I, a childless, unmarried woman with a demanding career that she clearly viewed as a peculiar hobby, was an unreliable element in her perfectly ordered world. I had chosen this house for its quiet cul-de-sac location, its mature oak trees, and its proximity to a winding trail where Bailey and I could walk in peace. I had not realized I was signing a blood oath to a regime of aesthetic conformity under the unblinking gaze of a woman whose purpose in life seemed to be the meticulous measurement of other people's grass. "Noted," I said. The word as final as my gavel. I pushed the door open. "I'll add it to the list." "Good evening, Brenda." I closed the door before she could fire another volley, leaning against the solid wood with a deep, weary sigh. The thump, thump, thump of Bailey's tail against the hardwood floor was a welcome, unconditional greeting. This was the real challenge of my life, you see. not the complex legal puzzles or the soul-crushing sentencing hearings. It was this slow, grinding, petty erosion of my peace by 1,000 tiny, bureaucratic cuts. It was the profound loneliness of being constantly watched, judged, and found perpetually wanting in my own home. The following weeks were a masterclass in suburban persecution. A bright orange warning ticket was left on my windshield for my garbage can being visibly prominent from the street a full 45 minutes before the scheduled pickup. A formal typed letter arrived, citing my non-compliant welcome mat, a beautiful, hand-woven piece a colleague had brought me from Guatemala for its excessive coloration and non-standardized design. Another letter complained about the excessive and disruptive volume of Bailey's barking, which on the cited date and time I knew for a fact consisted of him emitting a single half-hearted woof at a particularly bold squirrel taunting him from the fence. Each interaction with Brenda was a lesson in condescension. She spoke to me with a cloying, simpering tone, as if I were a slightly slow-witted child who couldn't grasp the simple rules, not a woman who had once successfully argued a landmark constitutional case before the 9 most powerful jurists in the country. The breaking point, the moment the simmering pot finally boiled over, came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I was in my home office, a room that was the true heart of my home. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, not filled with decorative, color-coordinated books, but with thick, dense legal volumes, leather-bound reports, and biographies of legal giants. Framed photographs dotted the shelves. One of my much younger self, face beaming with pride and ambition, standing between my parents on my law school graduation day. Another, more formal, of me shaking hands with a former president in the Oval Office. My black judicial robe, a symbol of immense power and responsibility, hung in a clear garment bag in the open closet, a simple, practical measure to keep it pristine. The doorbell rang, not a friendly chime but an insistent, prolonged buzz. I sighed, assuming it was a delivery driver. But when I opened the door, Brenda was standing there, a clipboard held to her chest like a shield, a triumphant, almost predatory glint in her eyes. Beside her stood a nervous-looking young man I didn't recognize, holding a professional-looking camera. "Eleanor," Brenda said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I'm so sorry to disturb your weekend, but we've had a complaint, a rather serious one." A cold trickle of apprehension ran down my spine. "A complaint about what, Brenda?" "About an unpermitted structural modification," she announced, as if reading a capital charge. A reliable neighbor reported seeing a large professional-grade safe being delivered several months ago. The installation of such a heavy item constitutes a significant structural alteration and, given its nature, a potential security risk to the community. It could affect home values and insurance. I was momentarily speechless. The safe. It was a fireproof, bolted-down model where I kept my passport, property deeds, my late mother's delicate jewelry, and a few other irreplaceable items. It was bolted to the concrete floor in the back of my walk-in closet, utterly invisible and affecting nothing but my own peace of mind. "It's a fireproof safe, Brenda," I said, my voice tight. "It's in a closet. It's not a structural modification. It's a piece of furniture." "That," she said, her voice hardening, "is for the inspection to determine." And to my utter astonishment, she took a deliberate step forward, attempting to cross the threshold of my home. I moved instantly, blocking her way, my body a solid barrier in the doorway. "Inspection? What inspection? You don't have a warrant." Her laugh was a short, harsh, brittle sound. "A warrant? Goodness, Eleanor, this isn't one of your television crime dramas. This is the Willow Creek HOA. Our covenants, which you legally signed and agreed to, allow for inspections by the board to ensure compliance with community standards." She leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Now, if you have nothing to hide..." She let the implication hang in the air, a toxic cloud of accusation. My blood ran cold, then ignited into a white-hot fury. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking, illegal audacity. She was standing on my porch invoking a homeowner's covenant to justify what any first-year law student would recognize as a blatant violation of the Fourth Amendment. "You," I said, my voice dropping to a low, controlled register that I used in court when a lawyer was on the verge of being held in contempt, are not entering my home without a proper, judicially sanctioned warrant or my explicit witnessed permission, neither of which you have. This conversation is over. Leave my property, now." For a moment she was taken aback by the steel in my voice. The mask of smug authority slipped, revealing a flash of pure, unadulterated shock that I would dare to resist her. Then her features recomposed into a mask of cold, hard spite. She knew she had lost this round, and the loss was a personal insult. "Consider this your final formal warning, Eleanor," she hissed, the faux sweetness gone, replaced by naked venom. "Compliance is not optional. The board will hear about this." She turned on her heel and marched away, the young photographer scrambling after her. I closed the door, my hands trembling not from fear, but from a rage so profound it felt clean and sharp. The victory of slamming the door in her face felt hollow. A deep, gnawing anxiety had taken root in my gut. I knew, with the certainty I reserved for the most predictable of legal outcomes, that this was not over. People like Brenda did not understand boundaries. They viewed them as personal insults, obstacles to be obliterated by their own self-righteousness. 2 days later, I returned from a particularly grueling and emotionally draining session in court. It was the sentencing hearing for a massive corporate fraud case that had evaporated the pensions and life savings of thousands of hardworking people. The weight of their betrayed trust, the hollowed-out look in the eyes of the victims who had given their statements, sat on my soul like a lead blanket. All I wanted was the profound silence of my home, a hot cup of Earl Grey tea, and the simple, comforting weight of Bailey's head resting on my lap. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. And I froze. Something was immediately viscerally wrong. The air in the house was different. It carried a faint foreign scent. Lavender and something else, something chemical like an abrasive cleaning spray. I always used lemon-scented cleaners. My senses, honed by years of noticing the smallest details in testimony and evidence, went on high alert. My eyes scanned the living room. It was tidy, but a throw pillow on the reading chair was angled differently. A book I had left on the coffee table, a biography of Thurgood Marshall, was now positioned parallel to the table's edge, not slightly askew as I'd left it. It was subtle, the kind of dissonance most people would dismiss as forgetfulness. But this was my sanctuary. I knew its state with the same intuitive cellular precision with which I knew the contours of a complex legal argument. My heart began a frantic, percussive rhythm against my ribs. A primal fear, the violation of one's nest, flashed through me, followed instantly by a second, colder wave. Incandescent rage. Someone had been in my house. I didn't call out. I didn't panic. I set my briefcase down silently and began to move through the downstairs with the deliberate caution of a hunter. Nothing was overtly stolen. The television was there. The small, valuable artifacts I'd collected from my travels were in their places. It was the unsettling feeling of a subtle, unwanted rearrangement. Then, I looked up the stairs, the door to my home office, which I always, without fail, kept firmly closed, was standing ajar by about 2 inches. A cold certainty settled over me. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step a silent accusation against the polished wood. I pushed the office door open, and my world narrowed to a single unbelievable point. Brenda was in my office. Her back was to me. She had a yellow tape measure in her hand, stretched across the width of my built-in bookshelves. She was muttering to herself, scribbling on a notepad perched on the shelf. Clearly a built-in, non-compliant alteration. The depth is excessive. Should have been approved by the architectural committee. Finable offense. She was so engrossed in her illicit trespassing inspection that she was completely oblivious to my presence. I stood there in the doorway, watching this woman, this petty, small-minded tyrant, violate the most sacred and personal space I owned. My eyes flicked to the open closet where my black judicial robe hung like a silent, solemn witness. They moved to the photographs on the wall, the evidence of a life and a career she could not even begin to comprehend. I did not shout. I did not scream. My voice, when it finally came, was low, quiet and carried the absolute zero temperature of the void between stars. It was my courtroom voice, the one that could silence a gallery with a whisper. "Brenda." She jumped violently, spinning around. The tape measure zipped back into its case with a loud, guilty snap. For a single unguarded moment, her face was a perfect portrait of sheer, panicked guilt. Then, just as quickly, it morphed into a mask of brazen, flustered authority. "Eleanor, you're home early." I was just verifying the dimensions from the complaint. The door was unlocked. I was concerned there might have been a breach. "The door was locked," I stated, my voice flat and factual. "I locked it myself this morning." "You have broken and entered into my home. That is a felony." She waved a dismissive, trembling hand, a nervous, high-pitched laugh escaping her lips. "Oh, for heaven's sake, don't be so dramatic." "This is HOA business, and I must say my initial inspection has revealed several violations. These built-in shelves were never submitted for approval." "And this..." She turned, gesturing vaguely, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for another excuse. They finally landed on the open closet. They saw the robe. They widened. They darted to the photograph of me with the former president. I could see the gears in her head turning, slow, grinding, clogged with the rust of her own narrow worldview. The pieces were clicking into a picture she was utterly unprepared to see. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty, ghastly pallor. Her jaw went slack. You're a... "Sit down, Brenda," I commanded. It was not a suggestion. It was a judicial order. The kind of tone that bypasses conscious thought and speaks directly to the spine. To my absolute lack of surprise, and to her evident horror, she obeyed, her legs giving way as she sank heavily into my high-backed leather desk chair. I walked around the desk with slow, deliberate steps, never breaking eye contact. I picked up the landline phone on my desk, its solid weight familiar in my hand. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Chief Daniels, please. Tell him it's Judge Eleanor Vance calling." I paused, my gaze locked on Brenda's, which were now wide with terror. "Yes, Frank, it's Ellie. I need to report a felony in progress at my home address. Yes, a residential breaking and entering. The suspect is currently present and in my custody." I gave him my address. "Thank you, Chief." I hung up. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the ragged, panicked sound of Brenda's breathing and the distant, cheerful barking of a dog down the street. She looked like a trapped animal, her mouth opening and closing but no sound emerging. "You can't... This is about the HOA," she finally stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. "You can't have me arrested for doing my job." "No, Brenda," I said, my voice softening into something that was almost, but not quite, pity. "This stopped being about the HOA the moment you picked my lock and crossed my threshold. This is about the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. It shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause. It's a concept that I believe predates even the most stringent of Willow Creek's covenants." The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly closer. Soon the flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of my quiet suburban street in urgent, rhythmic strokes. The response was swift. 2 squad cars and Chief Frank Daniels himself, a burly, competent man I knew from a few charity fundraisers. The police were impeccably professional and utterly unambiguous. Brenda was read her Miranda rights in my home office, her hands cuffed behind her back. She was led away, her protests dissolving into incoherent, humiliated sobs. She was charged with breaking and entering, a felony offense. The fallout was swift and absolute. The story, as these things do, leaked to the press. HOA president busted breaking into federal judge's home. It was a media feast, a perfect storm of schadenfreude and poetic justice. Brenda resigned in disgrace from the HOA board before she could be forcibly removed. Her husband, a local accountant, was reportedly mortified and retained a defense attorney for her. The anonymous neighbor who had made the complaint about the safe came to my door a week later. A weeping, anxious woman who confessed that Brenda had bullied and pressured her into making the call. But the true resolution, the real justice, unfolded in the weeks and months that followed. My home phone began to ring. It was Maria from 3 streets over, her voice trembling with a mixture of apology and newfound courage. "Judge Vance? I'm so sorry to bother you, but we all heard what happened. And, well, my husband and I were wondering if you might be willing to offer some advice. Brenda! She's been doing things like this for years. Just smaller, so we felt we couldn't fight back. She forced the Petersons to tear down their children's treehouse. Called it an attractive nuisance. She fined the Chen family for flying a Chinese flag on their son's graduation day. Called it a non-standard banner. We were all too scared to speak up, to think she might come after us next. One by one, they contacted me. The young couple she'd fined for having a nonconformist garden of native wildflowers. The elderly man she'd harassed for parking his vintage but perfectly maintained pickup truck in his own driveway. I listened to their stories, and my anger at Brenda was slowly replaced by a deeper, more profound sense of purpose. My case against her was legally ironclad, but I saw an opportunity for something more meaningful than mere punishment. In a carefully negotiated plea deal, the felony charge was reduced to a misdemeanor on several strict conditions. She was to resign from all community positions permanently. She was to complete 100 hours of community service. And she was to author and personally pay for a mass mailing to every single homeowner in Willow Creek Estates. This letter was not an apology. It was a detailed, plain-language document. In it, she was required to outline her own illegal actions and, most importantly, provide a clear, cited explanation of the constitutional rights of homeowners versus the limited, contractual power of an HOA. It was to be a lesson for the entire community, paid for by its former tyrant. The day that letter arrived in every mailbox was a quiet revolution. The climate of fear that had gripped the neighborhood for years began to evaporate under the warm light of knowledge and empowerment. A new, more reasonable and transparent board was elected by a landslide. The oppressive petty rules were systematically reevaluated and, one by one, struck down or rewritten with common sense and humanity in mind. The character of Willow Creek changed. It didn't descend into chaos or become a slum. It blossomed. People painted their front doors in cheerful, bold colors. Children's swing sets and play forts appeared in backyards. The Chen family flew their flag proudly on holidays. The neighborhood found its true character, not through enforced, soul-crushing uniformity, but through the diverse, beautiful, and personal expression of the individuals and families who lived there. I still sit on the bench. I still bear the weight of my robe and the responsibility of my gavel. But sometimes, the most profound and satisfying justice is not meted out in a crowded formal courtroom. It is found in the simple, unwavering courage to hold the line at your own front door. It is in the quiet, unassailable power of knowing your rights and having the fortitude to enforce them, not with hysterical anger, but with the calm, unshakable force of the law. Brenda and her husband moved away less than a year later. I still live in the house with the slightly too tall hedges, which I now keep at a defiant 47 inches. I see my neighbors now, we wave, we stop to chat about the weather, our dogs, our lives. They don't see me as a federal judge. They see me as Ellie, the woman who, quite by accident, reminded them all of a fundamental truth, that our homes are our castles, and that no one, not even a self-crowned queen of petty tyranny, has the right to cross the moat without an invitation. The challenge was a profound and personal violation, but the resolution was a restoration of something we had all forgotten we possessed, our freedom, our privacy, and our peace. And that, in the end, is a verdict worth celebrating every single day.